The solar eclipse of 1533 holds a significant place in religious and apocalyptic history, particularly in the context of the Anabaptist movement during the Reformation. At a time when Europe was in a state of religious and political upheaval, celestial events were often interpreted as signs of divine intervention. For many, including the radical Anabaptist leader Melchior Hoffman and his followers, the eclipse was seen as a harbinger of the impending end of the world. This article explores the historical context of the 1533 solar eclipse, its apocalyptic significance to the Anabaptists, and its place within broader early modern European beliefs about astronomy, prophecy, and religion. The early 16th century was a period of intense religious change in Europe. The Protestant Reformation, initiated by Martin Luther in 1517, was challenging the authority of the Catholic Church and reshaping the religious landscape. Amidst this upheaval, various sects and movements emerged, each with its own interpretation of Christian doctrine and the events unfolding in Europe. Among these groups were the Anabaptists, radical reformers who believed in adult baptism, the separation of church and state, and in many cases, the imminent return of Christ. The Anabaptists were particularly focused on eschatology, the study of the end times. Apocalyptic expectations were not uncommon during this period, as many people believed that the turmoil of the Reformation and the wars that followed were signs that the end of the world was near. In this charged atmosphere, natural events such as eclipses took on profound religious significance. Before exploring the 1533 eclipse, it is important to understand how solar eclipses were viewed in medieval and early modern Europe. Eclipses were often seen as ominous signs. While astronomy was a developing science, many people still interpreted celestial events through the lens of religious prophecy and superstition. The Bible contains several references to signs in the heavens, including in the book of Joel and the book of Revelation, where the sun turning dark is described as a sign of the end times. In medieval Europe, astronomical events such as comets and eclipses were frequently seen as portents of war, plague, or the death of rulers. The Black Death in the 14th century, for example, was often associated with unusual celestial occurrences. Even though by the 16th century the scientific understanding of eclipses had advanced, many still interpreted them through a religious and apocalyptic framework. One of the most influential apocalyptic figures in the Anabaptist movement was Melchior Hoffman, a radical preacher from Germany. Hoffman was deeply influenced by the Book of Revelation and believed that the end of the world was imminent. He prophesied that Christ would return to establish a heavenly kingdom on earth, and he saw the unfolding events of the Reformation as signs of this impending apocalypse. Hoffman's teachings attracted a following, particularly in Strasbourg, where he predicted that the New Jerusalem would be established. He set the year 1533 as the date when the end times would begin. This date was not chosen at random but was based on his interpretation of various biblical prophecies and his own visions. As the year 1533 approached, Hoffman and his followers were filled with expectation. They believed that Christ's return was at hand and that the faithful would be vindicated. In this context, the solar eclipse of October 28, 1533, was seen as a divine sign confirming Hoffman's predictions. The solar eclipse that occurred on October 28, 1533, was visible across Europe, including areas where the Anabaptist movement had gained followers. While eclipses were by this time understood as natural phenomena, many still viewed them as portents with religious significance. For Hoffman's followers, the eclipse seemed to confirm that their leader's predictions were accurate and that the end of the world was near. Descriptions of the eclipse from contemporary sources highlight the sense of awe and fear that it inspired. The sudden darkening of the sun in the middle of the day would have been a dramatic event, particularly in an era when many people still saw celestial phenomena as direct messages from God. For those who believed in an imminent apocalypse, the eclipse was a clear sign that the final judgment was approaching. Hoffman's followers took the eclipse as confirmation of their beliefs and intensified their preparations for the end times. Some began to withdraw from society, while others became more fervent in their evangelism, warning others to repent before it was too late. The eclipse, in their minds, was the fulfillment of biblical prophecies about the sun being darkened in the last days. During the 16th century, celestial phenomena like eclipses, planetary alignments, and even comets were widely seen as divine messages or signs of impending doom. This belief was rooted in medieval and ancient traditions that associated disturbances in the heavens with shifts in human destiny. Solar and lunar eclipses were particularly charged with prophetic meaning, largely because the sudden disappearance or alteration of a major celestial body appeared unnatural or supernatural to the general populace. Religious figures, such as Melchior Hoffman, capitalized on these beliefs to bolster their apocalyptic messages. Beyond the religious context, European kings, scientists, and philosophers were also deeply concerned with celestial movements, particularly when such events seemed to correlate with wars, famines, or the deaths of important figures. The solar eclipse of 1533, with its startling visual impact, was a prime event to be interpreted as divine judgment on a world in chaos, riven by the Reformation, political conflicts, and widespread economic inequality. For Hoffman's followers, and for other radical groups who espoused millenarian views, the eclipse was not just a random natural occurrence. It was seen as a manifestation of divine will, an unmistakable marker of the end of the world, and a signal that they were among the chosen few who had the knowledge and insight to prepare for Christ's return. Despite the heightened expectations surrounding the 1533 eclipse, the year came and went without the apocalyptic events Hoffman had predicted. Christ did not return, and the New Jerusalem was not established. This failure led to a crisis of faith for many of Hoffman's followers. While some continued to believe in his teachings, others became disillusioned. Hoffman himself was imprisoned by the authorities in Strasbourg in 1533, and he remained in prison until his death in 1543. His failure to accurately predict the apocalypse did not, however, mark the end of apocalyptic Anabaptism. Other leaders, such as Jan Matthys and John of Leyden, would carry on the tradition of radical, apocalyptic Anabaptism, leading to the infamous Munster Rebellion, where the belief in an impending apocalypse led to a violent uprising and the establishment of a short-lived Anabaptist theocracy. In many ways, the Anabaptist movement's apocalyptic fervor found its violent culmination in the Munster Rebellion. After Melchior Hoffman's predictions failed to materialize, more radical Anabaptists, under the leadership of Jan Matthys and John of Leyden, took control of the city of Munster, in present-day Germany, in 1534. They declared it the New Jerusalem, where God's kingdom would be established on earth. They believed the apocalypse was imminent, and that Munster would be the center of this new heavenly kingdom. Munster became a theocratic state where radical Anabaptist beliefs, including polygamy, communal property, and extreme apocalyptic expectations, were enforced. The eclipse of 1533 was still fresh in the minds of many as a divine precursor to these events. However, the rebellion ended in a bloody siege, with the city eventually falling to Catholic and Lutheran forces in 1535. The leaders were executed, and their bodies were displayed as a warning against religious radicalism. While the Munster Rebellion was a failed attempt at establishing an Anabaptist theocracy, its legacy continued to influence religious movements. The radical apocalypticism of the Munsterites faded, but more moderate forms of Anabaptism survived and evolved, giving rise to modern groups such as the Mennonites and Amish. The 1533 eclipse is just one example of how celestial events have been interpreted through an apocalyptic lens in Christian history. Throughout the medieval and early modern periods, there were numerous instances where natural phenomena, such as comets, eclipses, and planetary conjunctions, were seen as signs of the end times. In the Book of Revelation, which played a central role in Hoffman's apocalyptic theology, there are multiple references to signs in the heavens that would herald the end of the world. The darkening of the sun is specifically mentioned in Revelation 6:12. I watched as he opened the sixth seal. There was a great earthquake. The sun turned black like sackcloth made of goat hair, the whole moon turned blood red. For Hoffman and his followers, the eclipse of 1533 seemed to fit this apocalyptic imagery perfectly. The interpretation of eclipses and other celestial events as divine signs continued well beyond the Reformation. Even today, some people continue to see astronomical phenomena as indications of significant spiritual or prophetic events. The solar eclipse of 1533 was a pivotal moment in the apocalyptic expectations of the Anabaptist movement, particularly for the followers of Melchior Hoffman. While Hoffman's predictions ultimately failed, and the expected end times did not materialize, the eclipse remains a fascinating example of how celestial events can take on profound religious significance. In the broader context of European history, The 1533 eclipse serves as a reminder of the deep connections between religious belief, prophecy, and the natural world. For many in the 16th century, the heavens were not just distant, impersonal objects of scientific study, they were alive with meaning and messages from God. And while the specific apocalyptic expectations of the Anabaptists may have passed, the impulse to interpret the heavens as a divine script continues to resonate in various religious traditions to this day.